She was the kind of girl people overlooked. Not because she was quiet. She wasn't. In fact, she asked questions constantly, often at the wrong time. She'd talk in class when she wasn't supposed to, daydream out the window when she was being spoken to, and interrupt with thoughts that didn't seem to make sense to anyone else. Some teachers thought she was lazy. Others thought she just liked attention. The truth was she was trying, really trying, but everything just felt harder for her. Growing up in a small town where everyone knew everyone, she stood out in ways that weren't always welcome. Her clothes didn't match. Her handwriting was messy. And while other kids seemed to breeze through school, she stumbled over words while reading out loud. Her classmates laughed. One even mimicked her. That stuck with her for years. At home, things weren't much easier. Her mother worked double shifts and came home exhausted. There were bills on the fridge and noise in the hallway of their apartment building. She had older siblings who were always too busy or too tired to listen. No one in her family had ever gone into anything like the arts. They didn't see the point. As far as they were concerned, being a performer was a dream for rich people, not for girls like her. But that didn't stop her from dreaming. She remembered the first time she saw a live play. It was at a school field trip. Nothing big, just a small traveling group putting on a simple story in the gym. But to her, it was magic. The lights, the movement, the way someone could be completely transformed just by stepping into a role. She couldn't stop thinking about it. She came home and acted out the whole play in front of her bedroom mirror, changing her voice and posture with every character. She stayed up late pretending she was on a stage somewhere far away where no one laughed at her, where she wasn't the girl who read too slow or asked too many questions. She was someone important. The next day at school, she told her teacher she wanted to be on stage one day. The teacher chuckled and said, "That's nice, but maybe think of a backup plan." It wasn't meant to be cruel, but it landed like a stone in her stomach. People had already made up their minds about her. Even when she tried hard to change their opinions, it felt like she was always 2 steps behind. She joined a school drama club, but no one took her seriously. She was given the smallest parts, background roles with no lines. When she asked why, she was told, "You're not ready yet." But how do you get ready if you're never given the chance? At home, things were no better. Her family didn't understand why she was so obsessed with acting. "You need a real job," her older brother said once. "Nobody from here makes it in that world. You'll just end up broke and disappointed." Still, she didn't let go of the dream. Even if it was just a small flame inside her, it was enough to keep going. After high school, she knew college wasn't an option. Her grades weren't great, and the family couldn't afford it anyway. So she worked. Diners, grocery stores, cleaning jobs. But in between, she took every chance she could to be near a stage. She volunteered at the local theater, cleaned dressing rooms, passed out flyers, and watched from the wings as others performed. She studied them quietly. How they moved, how they spoke, how they used silence just as powerfully as words. She learned by watching, listening, absorbing every detail. When she saved up enough, she enrolled in a low-cost acting workshop in the city nearby. It wasn't fancy, a few old chairs, worn-out curtains, and a teacher who smelled like too much coffee. But to her, it felt like a big step. It was the first time she was surrounded by other people who wanted the same thing she did. But even there, she felt out of place. The others seemed confident, polished. They used words she didn't know. They had already performed in real plays or had agents. She felt small. During her first monologue, she stumbled. Her voice shook. Her mind went blank halfway through. Nobody laughed, but she could feel the silence, that thick, heavy silence of disappointment. The teacher gave her a nod, but moved on quickly. She sat back down, cheeks burning, heart sinking. That night, she cried on the bus ride home. Doubt crept in slowly, like fog. Maybe everyone was right. Maybe she didn't have it. Maybe this was all just a fantasy, and it was time to wake up. The next few classes, she barely spoke. She watched instead, sitting quietly in the back. She started skipping some sessions. The spark inside her dimmed. One afternoon, After a particularly bad day, she called her mom. She hadn't said much about the workshop before, not wanting to get the usual "you should be working more hours" lecture. But this time she broke down. "I'm not good at this," she said softly. "Maybe I was just kidding myself." Her mom didn't say anything right away. Then she said, "Well, you've never done things the easy way. But maybe that's your way. Just don't quit before you've really tried." It wasn't a passionate speech, but it stuck. The next day, she didn't go to the workshop. Instead, she stood in front of her mirror again, just like she used to. She picked a scene from her favorite film and performed it, not for anyone else, just for herself. Then she did it again and again. She recorded it on her phone and watched it back. It wasn't great, but it was something. She began practicing every night, not for praise, not for applause, just to get better, just to keep the flame alive. No one saw it yet. No one believed in her yet. But something was starting to change, not outside, but inside her. She still felt scared, still heard the voice that said, "You're not enough." But now, she had another voice, softer, quieter, but growing stronger. It said, "Try one more time, and sometimes that's all it takes." The first time she froze on stage, it felt like the world stopped moving. She had been working for weeks on a scene for her acting workshop, just a short piece, 2 minutes long. She practiced every night in her room, saying the lines over and over, watching herself in the mirror, changing her voice, adjusting her face. She thought she was ready, but when it was her turn to perform in front of the class, everything slipped away. She stood there under those cheap yellow lights with 10 pairs of eyes staring back at her. Her hands shook, her throat dried up. She opened her mouth, and nothing came out. Not one word. Seconds passed, maybe minutes. She couldn't tell. She felt heat rising up her neck. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst. Finally, the teacher said, "It's okay. We'll come back to you later." She sat down, completely silent. Someone behind her whispered something, and a few others chuckled. She didn't look back. She just stared down at her shoes and bit the inside of her cheek, hoping the pain would stop the tears from coming. That night, she didn't go straight home. She sat on a bench outside the building for over an hour. People passed by, talking, laughing, living their lives. She sat still, wondering if she should quit. She kept thinking, maybe they were right all along. Maybe this isn't for me. Maybe I'm not strong enough. She missed the next 2 classes. No one called. No one messaged. And that told her everything she thought she needed to know. She didn't matter in that room. Maybe she never did. But something strange happened during that time away. While she was working her usual shift at the cafe, wiping down tables and carrying trays, she overheard a customer talking about a small community theater nearby that needed volunteers. They were starting a new program for teens with learning differences and needed someone to help backstage. She didn't think twice. She showed up the next day. The theater wasn't fancy. It was small, tucked behind a library. The stage was worn down, and the curtains had patches sewn into them. But it felt real. It felt honest. The kind of place where people did things because they loved them, not because they wanted to impress anyone. Her job was simple: help the kids with costumes, clean up after rehearsals, set out chairs. But soon, she found herself doing more. Some of the kids were shy or struggled to remember lines. She sat with them, worked through the scenes slowly, gave them small tricks to help them remember. She saw herself in them. The fear, the nerves, the way their faces lit up when someone believed in them. One day, when a student was too anxious to go on stage, the director turned to her and asked, "Can you step in for just a minute, just so the others can practice?" She hesitated, but nodded. She read the lines. No pressure, no spotlight. Just helping out. But something clicked. She didn't freeze. Her voice didn't shake. In fact, she felt calm, like she belonged there, and for the first time in a long while, she walked off the stage smiling. The director noticed. "You've got something," he said. Why don't you try putting together your own piece for the student showcase next month? Her first instinct was to say no, but something in her, the part that still held on to that old dream, said yes. She didn't want to perform something someone else had written. She wanted to tell her own story. So she began writing late at night after work. At first, the words came out messy and awkward, but slowly, they formed into something honest. A story about feeling invisible, about messing up, about holding on even when no one believes in you. It wasn't polished, it wasn't perfect, but it was real. On the night of the showcase, she stood backstage with shaky hands and a racing heart. The crowd was small, mostly families and friends, but to her it felt like a stadium. When her name was called, she walked onto the stage, lights bright in her eyes. She took a deep breath and started. At first she spoke quietly, unsure, but as the story moved on, something happened. She found a rhythm. Her voice grew stronger. Her body loosened. She wasn't pretending to be someone else. She was just being herself, raw and open in front of a room full of strangers. When she finished, there was a pause. A long, deep silence, then came the applause. Not loud, not wild, but genuine. She saw people in the audience nodding, some even wiping their eyes. It wasn't just clapping. It was connection. After the show, a woman approached her in the hallway. She had a teenage daughter with her, quiet and holding a notebook close to her chest. "My daughter wants to be a writer," the woman said, "but she's shy. Tonight," she said, "if she can do it, maybe I can too." That moment stayed with her. It was the first time she realized something important. Success wasn't about being the best or being famous. It was about being honest, about reaching someone, even just one person. That night she had done that. Word started to spread about her performance. Someone posted a short video clip online. It didn't go viral, but it reached enough people to get noticed by a local arts group. They invited her to perform at a small festival happening in a few months. They couldn't pay her much, just a small travel stipend and a slot on the schedule, but she didn't care. It was another stage. Another chance. She worked hard on a new piece. This one went deeper, not just about fear and failure, but about trying again, about the quiet strength it takes to keep going when everything tells you to stop. She performed it at the festival, in a dimly lit warehouse space with fold-out chairs and buzzing lights. But again, something clicked. The crowd was bigger this time, and by the end, people stood. They clapped. They cheered. She didn't need anyone to tell her this time. She knew. This was her place. Not because she fit into someone else's idea of what a performer should be, but because she made room for herself in her own way. It didn't mean things got easy after that. She still worked shifts to pay bills. She still got nervous before every show. She still faced rejection, a lot of it. But now she had proof that her voice mattered, that her story meant something, and most importantly, she wasn't waiting for someone else to say, "You're good enough." She had already said it to herself. That changed everything. She didn't have a big stage. No spotlight, no fancy costumes, but word of her small, honest performances started reaching people in ways she never imagined. After her piece at the local festival, she received a message from a small theater group in another city. They were putting together a showcase for new voices, people who had something real to say, people whose stories weren't often heard. They had seen a video clip of her performance online. "Your words stayed with us," the message said. "Would you like to be part of this?" She stared at the screen for a long time before replying. Part of her wanted to say no. She was still working part-time at a diner. She barely had enough money for rent, let alone travel, but something in her heart whispered, "This is what you've been waiting for." So she said yes. She borrowed money for a bus ticket, packed her things into a second-hand suitcase, and stayed in a small, shared room above the theater for the weekend. The walls were thin. The bathroom light flickered. But none of that mattered. She was here, and her name was on the printed program. When it was her turn to perform, she felt the nerves creep in again. That familiar tight feeling in her chest, the dry mouth, the shaky hands. But this time she remembered the girl from the small stage, the one who had made just one person in the audience feel seen. That was enough. She walked out and performed a piece about being underestimated, About always being told she wasn't ready, wasn't smart enough, wasn't stage material. She didn't shout. She didn't pretend. She just told the truth, in the only way she knew how. And once again, the silence after she finished said everything. It wasn't the kind of silence that felt cold or awkward. It was the kind that held weight. The kind where people were really thinking, really feeling. And then came the applause. Not just clapping, but cheers. People stood up. She blinked, stunned, as the lights came up. Later that night, people came to talk to her. Some asked where they could see her next show. One woman hugged her and said, "Thank you. I needed that tonight." A man handed her his card, a producer who worked on independent theater shows. He said, "You have something. Keep going." For the first time, she believed it. That trip changed everything. When she returned home, she made a decision. No more waiting tables on weekends. She would still work her job during the week to survive, but weekends, those were hers now. For writing. For performing. For building something that was finally starting to feel like a real path. She began putting together her own one-woman show, a mix of personal stories, spoken word, and movement. She rented out a tiny black box theater space with just 30 seats. She promoted it herself, handing out flyers, messaging local groups, inviting anyone who'd listen. Opening night came. The seats weren't full, but they weren't empty either. She stood backstage, holding the curtain in one hand, trying not to panic. Her palms were sweating. Her stomach flipped. Then she stepped out, and something shifted. This was her space now. Her voice. Her story. She spoke of failure, of fear, of freezing on stage, of being called too loud, too messy, too emotional, and she spoke of holding on anyway. She weaved her stories with humor, with pain, with quiet strength, and the audience, they were with her every step of the way. By the end of the show, a few people were crying. A few were smiling quietly. One person stood up and started clapping. Others followed. That night, she walked home in the dark, holding a plastic container of leftover snacks from backstage, and felt something new. Pride. Not because she was perfect, and she knew she wasn't, but because she had done it her way. She had created something real. Soon, more small theaters began reaching out. Some had seen her show. Others had heard about it through friends. She was invited to perform in 2 more cities. It wasn't glamorous. She stayed in spare rooms, slept on couches, sometimes didn't get paid at all. But the experience? That was priceless. Every new show brought someone new into her corner. Another person who connected with her words. Another artist who wanted to collaborate. Another voice saying, "You're not alone." She started to see how her struggles, the messy handwriting, the slow reading, the anxiety, weren't roadblocks. They were part of her story. Part of what made her voice different. And people didn't just accept that. They needed it, but not everyone understood. There were still moments of doubt. Moments where she was told she wasn't trained enough or polished enough. Some people in the theater world looked down on her style. They said her performances were too raw, too emotional, too personal. One critic wrote, "She doesn't follow the usual structure. It's more like watching someone's journal on stage." She read that review 3 times. At first it stung. Then she smiled. Yes, she thought. That's exactly the point. She wasn't trying to be like everyone else. She was creating a space where people who didn't fit the mold could still feel seen. A space where being different wasn't something to hide, it was something to celebrate. And slowly, people started to notice. Not the big stages yet. Not the magazines or award shows. But people. Real people. Audiences who filled tiny rooms and stayed after the lights came up just to say, "Thank you." She began hosting small workshops for others who felt like they didn't belong in the official theater world. People who had been told they were too quiet, too broken, too strange. She helped them find their stories, helped them stand on stage even if their voices trembled. One night after a workshop showcase, she sat in the back row, watching one of her students perform for the first time. The girl forgot her lines halfway through, then took a deep breath, laughed, and kept going. The audience clapped. And she felt her chest swell with pride. She had come a long way from the girl who froze on stage. But she never forgot what it felt like to be her. That feeling stayed with her, and it reminded her why she started. Not for fame, not for applause, but for connection. She wasn't trying to be a star. She was trying to be honest. And that in the end was what people needed most. So night after night in small rooms and quiet cities, she stood under soft lights and told her truth. Sometimes the seats were full. Sometimes only a few people showed up. But she gave them everything every time because someone once made her feel invisible. And now her story was helping others feel seen. And that to her was everything. She had spent years learning what it truly meant to be on stage. Not the kind of stage with bright lights and thousands of faces. Not the kind where everything feels perfect and rehearsed. But the small, quiet stages where truth lived. That was where she belonged. But as she grew, so did the challenges. The life of a struggling artist wasn't easy. Some days she barely had enough money for food. She'd take extra shifts at work, sometimes late into the night, then rush to early rehearsals fighting exhaustion. She learned the hard way that passion alone couldn't pay the bills. There were times she wondered if she was foolish to keep chasing this dream. When friends moved on to steady jobs, buying cars, starting families, she felt left behind. They'd ask, "When will you get a real job?" She'd smile, but inside she felt the weight of their doubt. But what kept her going was not just the dream of success. It was the moments, small, powerful moments, when someone came up to her after a show and said, "You helped me see myself." Or when a shy teenager told her, "You make me believe I can try." She started to realize something important. The stage wasn't about being perfect or famous. It was about being human. One afternoon, she was invited to speak at a local school. They asked her to talk to a group of students who struggled with learning and confidence. She was nervous, like what could she say to them that mattered? But when she walked into the classroom, she felt something shift inside. She shared her story. The stumbles, the fears, the failures, the small victories, and how she found her way through the darkness by holding on to that little spark inside. The students listened. Some nodded. Some wiped tears quietly. Afterward, they came up to her one by one with questions, with thanks, with stories of their own. That day, she saw the power of her voice outside the theater. She wasn't just performing, she was connecting, teaching, healing. After the school visit, she started thinking bigger. What if she could create a space for more people like her? People who had been told they wouldn't make it? People whose voices were quiet or shaky or different? She began organizing community workshops. Spaces where everyone was welcome, no matter their background, skill, or story. She made sure these workshops were free or low cost because she knew money shouldn't be the barrier. At first, it was just a handful of people, some nervous, some skeptical. But week by week, the group grew. People came with doubts and left with hope. They shared stories, tried new things, and found courage they didn't know they had. One evening, after a long day of work and rehearsals, she sat in the workshop room alone, looking around at the empty chairs. She thought about how far she'd come. The little girl who once froze on stage was now helping others step into the light. But the journey wasn't over. There were still days filled with rejection. Like when a bigger theater turned down her proposal because her style was too unconventional, or when an agent told her she needed more polish to succeed. Those moments stung, but they didn't stop her. Instead, they made her fight harder. She learned to balance. Between work and art, between survival and dreams, between doubt and belief. Slowly, things started to change. More invitations to perform, more collaborations with artists who shared her vision, more audiences who wanted honest, real stories. She even began to earn a small living from her work, enough to quit some of her extra jobs and focus more on her art. But more than anything, she found family in her community, a family made of broken, brave, imperfect people who lifted each other up. One night, at a small theater packed with familiar faces, she stood on stage and looked out at the crowd. Some were new. Some had been with her from the start. All were there to listen. As she began her piece, she felt calm, strong, alive. This was no longer about proving anyone wrong. It was about proving to herself that she was enough. She told stories of fear and hope, of falling and rising. She spoke of every small victory and every hard-fought lesson. And with every word, the audience leaned in. When the final lines hung in the air, the applause wasn't just noise. It was love, recognition, a shared heartbeat. She smiled, tears shining in her eyes, because she had done it. Not by becoming someone else, but by being exactly who she was meant to be. The stage had changed her life in ways she never imagined. Not because she had become famous or rich, not because she stood in front of huge crowds or signed big contracts, but because it taught her who she was, strong, real, and worthy. She still remembered the girl who froze in front of a small class, feeling invisible and scared. And she never forgot how painful that silence was. But now, standing under the soft lights of a small theater, surrounded by people who believed in her, she understood something bigger. Failure isn't the end. It's just part of the story. Her journey wasn't about being perfect. It was about being brave enough to show up again and again, even when she didn't know what would happen next. With every show, every workshop, every story shared, she built a world where people who felt lost or forgotten could find a voice. One afternoon, she sat in a quiet cafe, scribbling notes for her next project. A little girl nearby was drawing pictures, her face scrunched in concentration. The girl looked up and smiled, and in that moment she saw herself. The same spark, the same hope. She knew there would always be challenges ahead. There would be nights filled with doubt, days when her body ached and her heart felt heavy, but she had learned to hold on to the light inside no matter how small it seemed, because that light was her story, her truth, and it had the power to change not just her own life but the lives of others. And that was the real success.